Dear distinguished guests, good afternoon. Welcome all of you to join this symposium. The topic today is COVID-19 impact and response in the Asia and Oceania region. This symposium is organized by International Association of Gerontology and Geriatrics, Asia-Oceania region, IAGG-AOR. The organizers are all of the chairs and speakers of this session. They are the President, the immediate past and the past Chairman and the Secretary General of IAGG-AOR. I am Zheng Jielin, the very fresh Chairman of IAGG-AOR. I am currently Vice President of China Medical University, Taiwan. It is my pleasure to moderate this session, and it is our honor to have two discussants with us in the Q&A live session. One is Professor Siriform Sese from Thailand. She was the immediate past Secretary General IAGG-AOR, and she is currently Associate Professor, Faculty of Nursing, Chulalongkorn University, and the Vice President of the Thai Society of Gerontology and Geriatric Medicine, Thailand. The other is Professor Ken Hill from Australia. He is a physiotherapist and the Director of the Rehabilitation, Aging, and the Independent Living (RAIL) Research Center, Monash University, Australia. And he was the past chairperson IAGG-AOR. Actually, he is the mentor of our organizing team conducting the symposium today. There are four speakers today. The first one is Professor Prasad Sanathai from Thailand. Dr. Prasad was the immediate past chairman of IAGG-AOR. He is president of Thai Society of Gerontology and Geriatric Medicine and deputy dean of Faculty of Medicine, Sririja Hospital, Mahidol University, Thailand. The second speaker is Professor Ding Zheng Zhan from Taiwan. Dr. Zhan is the President Secretary General of IAGG-AOR. He is Director of the Department of Geriatrics and Gerontology and a clinical professor of internal medicine at National Taiwan University Hospital. He is also the co-chair of the Asia-Pacific Fragility Fracture Alliance. And the third speaker is Professor Hidenori Arai from Japan. Professor Arai is the president of National Center for Geriatrics and Gerontology, NCGG, Japan, the president of the Japan Gerontological Society, the vice president of the Japan Geriatric Society, and the president of Japanese Association on Sarcopenia and Frailty. Additionally, he is the president of Asia Academy of Medicine for Aging and the vice president of Asia Association of Frailty and Sarcopenia. The last one is Professor Julia Byers from Australia. Professor Byers is the head of the International Longevity Center, Australia, and the co-chair of ILC Global Alliance. He is the chair of the Social Research and Planning Subcommittee of IAGG-AOR, and she was the past Secretary General of IAGG-AOR. They will give us a comprehensive overview of some key impacts of COVID-19 on older people in Asian countries and how communities and healthcare systems have responded. For example, the positive and negative of vaccinations, the impact of long-term care, the consequences of increasing risk of physical frailty, and ageism, the increasing intergenerational tensions. Best wish for a productive and enjoyable conference. Your participation in this symposium will have a meaningful and lasting impact. Hope you will benefit from it. Thank you and have a good day.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. The next 10 minutes, I will talk about COVID-19 vaccination for older people. From the data, the infection rate and mortality rate of the COVID-19 infection is quite high in Asia and Oceania, second only to Africa. This is another study show that the COVID-19 death rate is quite high with increasing age from 16 countries. Why older people are vulnerable to epidemics? There are many factors such as biological one, the immunosenescence, the comorbidity, atypical presentation. The other factors such as demographic, behavioral, social, and healthcare. So all these factors can contribute to the vulnerability of old people to epidemics. Comparing to the other two diseases in older people, this is seasonal influenza and invasive pneumococcal disease. You can see the case fatality rate of the COVID-19 is about 2 to 3%. It's lower than seasonal influenza, but higher than influenza, but lower than pneumococcal disease. And these three diseases share the same risk factor for mortality. But when we look into the COVID-19 specifically, we can see the older age has got the highest odds ratio of 6.01, which is the highest one. So prevention is better than cure. At the beginning of the epidemic, our Asia-Oceania IAGG, we have launched a mnemonic called COVID IAGG Asia-Oceania, such as catnap to get adequate sleep, to good emotion, exercise, adequate intake, social distancing. So that's the way to prevent to get the disease. But at that time, no vaccine mentioned because the vaccine is just available at the end of the year 2020. So after that, WHO has tried to recommend the vaccine for every people in the world, but because of the shortage of the vaccine at that time, WHO has set a prioritization for target population, such as if any country want to get 10% vaccination in the country, the priority should be placed on healthcare workers and the older people. And if the percentage increase to 20%, you can see again older adult has got the priority as well. But when we look into the real world situation in Hong Kong, you can see the older people tend to get the vaccination much lower than those in younger age group. But what about in Australia? The situation is opposite. The older people tend to get the higher percentage of vaccine. Why? What is the reason behind this? Because of the COVID-19 vaccine hesitancy. From the study show that those depend on healthcare provider at that time, at the beginning of the vaccine, the social media, and the internet, a web page, family and friends, as the main source on COVID-19, tend to express higher negative vaccine intent. But the nearly 90% of those healthcare providers who express a negative intent tend to increase from 50% to 90% by the end of this month. Why? Because the more data on the safety of the vaccine. So the WHO has recommended 3 drivers of COVID-19 vaccine uptake. The first one is to create an enabling environment, such as is the location of the vaccine to be given in a close by convenient place. It is about the cost for the vaccine itself, traveling, opportunity, cost of missing work. Time is time consuming to get the vaccine, quality of vaccine of being vaccinated. Do people feel that they are treated with kindness, understanding and respect? And information have people been given timely, easy to understand and relevant information? Is it a default in the workplace to vaccinate all employees? And health regulation or mandates such as those who travel abroad. And the second driver is the social influence. At the beginning, from studies show that people in the community are wary of vaccination and believe that vaccine does not work or have a side effects, which will be very bad. They will give a negative signal to others who might otherwise in favor of neutral towards vaccination. Again, predominant narrative in the social media also skew people's perception of what the majority believe and do. So how to harnessing social influence? So we have to make social norm in favor of vaccination more salient, highlight new and emerging norm in favor of vaccination, try to promote the perception that most people are getting vaccinated, and leveraging the work of health personnel, supporting health personnel to promote vaccine. Why? Because health personnel are often the most trusted source of advice on vaccine, and amplifying endorsement from trusted community members. And the third driver is increasing motivation. Be careful that we have to building timely trust in vaccine. If widely rolling out a vaccine followed by announcement of adverse risk can lead to a long-lasting damage in confidence in the vaccine. Leveraging anticipated regret in communication. So we have to convey the message that consequence of inaction and end up in contracting COVID-19 or transmitting to their loved one would be a disaster. And emphasizing the social benefit of vaccination, such as it can create herd immunity if we vaccinate more people. But another issue is people tend to think about the vaccine may be effective, but dose may be too much. Is it true? Is it better to get the less dose of vaccine? It can create the less adverse event. But what about the vaccine effectiveness? So this is another study in Thailand. They recruit the healthy adult to get the intradermal compared with the intramuscular, and it showed that it works. Intradermal can create antibody and less side effects. What about the older people? This is a really big question for us. So we have conduct a study, particularly in Thai older people. For those who get 2 doses primary series of the AstraZeneca vaccine, and to get the 3rd dose of the messenger RNA vaccine. This is our primary objective. So we measure the immunoglobulin and also to measure the neutralizing antibody or NT. At the beginning, we can see the best characteristic of this between 4 arms, which is IDIM of the Moderna vaccine, IDIM of the Pfizer vaccine. So there is no significant difference between these baseline characteristics. Now, come to the immunoglobulin. We can see both the age less than 80 and more than 80 years old. The intramuscular vaccine by the Moderna, there's no significant difference between IDIM. Again, in this older age group, you can see the same, no significant difference. And this is also true for the Pfizer vaccine as well, except for this arm. Now, come to the NT, antibody, which is really robust to attack or to prevent infection. And we can see at the Wuhan variant, you can see those less than 80 years old and more than 80 years old, there is no significant difference between ID and IM regarding the NT antibody. And this is also true for Omicron as well, between ID and IM. IDIM. This is by Moderna vaccine. But what about the Pfizer vaccine? This is also true again. There's no significant difference between the NT antibody level between ID and IM in younger age group and older age group. And what about the adverse event? You can see that the intradermal tend to has the lower level of the systemic reaction, but local reaction, the ID tend to have the higher rate of local reaction. Again, the myalgia, fatigue, we can see that intradermal tend to have a lower prevalence of the adverse event compared to the intramuscular. In conclusion, three drivers of the COVID-19 vaccine uptake create enabling environment, harnessing social influence, increasing motivation. And we can see that the antibody after the third dose of booster, it increased more than 1,000 times after the third booster vaccine. And regarding the immunoglobulin, at 2 to 4 weeks after the third booster vaccine, the Moderna vaccine performed better than Pfizer vaccine in this descending order as follows. Moderna IM is better than Moderna ID, better than Pfizer IM, and better than Pfizer ID. Systemic adverse event after ID injection is lower than intramuscular without significant difference. And the bottom line is intradermal Moderna vaccine would be a good choice for lower systemic adverse event and initiation of vaccine shortage. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me to the Congress. Today, the presentation for me is the COVID-19 impact and response of the long-term care in the Asia Pacific and the Oceania region. I'm Dr. Derek Chen from Taiwan. I'm the director of the Department of Geriatrics and Gerontology at the National Taiwan University Hospital. I'm also the clinical professor of the Department of Medicine in the National Taiwan University and also the board member of Taiwan Association of Gerontology and Geriatrics. And the presentation are three parts. The first part is about the COVID-19 infection of the region. And the second part is about the impacts on the long-term care of the region. The third part is about the mitigation strategy in the region. So as we can see here, right now we are in the April. So if you look at the region, roughly around 2021, there's a surge of the infection because of Delta. But right now, when we look at the number, because of the Omicron, the number of infections are increasing. But the problem is that we are very difficult to identify which part of the infection is from the entire population or from the long-term care. So then we are going to look at each country. Let's start from the ABC. The first country is Australia. Then if we look at Australia, the long-term care setting, we can see here the long-term care cases is more than 31,000. And the staff in the long-term care is also then more than the 30,000. If we look at the China cases, they do not officially count the long-term care infections numbers, but they will say that there is increasing workload from lack of protection in the nursing home staff. And also there's a lack of psychological counseling for the long-term care residents. If we look at Hong Kong, we all know that in the recent several months, Hong Kong mortality is very, very high. So then the long-term care mortality are 3 times higher than the usual populations. If you look at India, they also do not have official data on the long-term care infections. But they say that because in India, they do not have very good long-term care facilities. So the long-term care is usually in a community, so probably in a village, and care phones are unregulated. So then the number are usually not trusted. So then they do not have very good results on the long-term care numbers. Then if you look at Indonesia, same is here. They have only limited data on the information on people needing long-term care who are affected by the COVID-19. If you look at the mitigation strategy, which will be reported later, they actually do not have specific guidelines. They do not have specific guidelines. And if you look at Japan, we all know that Japan are very old, and they also have a lot of people living in the long-term care facilities. But then they have a lot of numbers reported that older adults are affected by the COVID-19 numbers. But this number are not stratified by the long-term care facilities. And Japan almost solely rely on the length lockdown of long-term care facilities. But again, we will know that people need to live in their homes or long-term care facilities. So the long-term care lockdown is not a very good strategy. If you look at the South Korea is saying that the long-term care or nursing home deaths is about 40% of the total deaths. So it means that long-term care facility deaths are very important, accounted for a majority of the death. And if you look at New Zealand, so they say that the aged residential cares cluster, they account for only 10% of total cases. But it's important here, they accounted for 70% of all the deaths. So which means that when we have a lot of people, they are very old, and in a long-term care setting, the mortality rate is very, very high. And also, the healthcare workers in the long-term care is about 50% of the infected residents. So then we also know that the long-term care facility, they accounted for a lot of COVID-19 tolls in these 2021 and 2022 COVID-19 infections. If you look at Singapore, it says that in comparison to other countries, there are only very few cases in the nursing homes. And then all the residents, they were transferred to the acute hospitals, but they do not have separate data about the nursing homes. If you look at Taiwan, before 2022, it's different because in 2021, there's only 120 people in the nursing home got affected by the long-term care, by the COVID-19. But right now, in this couple of days, the daily infection numbers are increasing. Like today is April 28th, and the infection number is above 10,000 people of the country. So then this my Omicron is totally different than the old period. But then in 2021, the entire country kind of locked down. So then because of the lockdown, so a lot of infection control is doing very well. So then in 2021, they actually do not have a lot of infections in Taiwan. So let's look at the mitigation strategies in the long-term care setting. So first part, all the long-term care setting, they need to do the environmental and hand disinfections. So everybody needs to do the hand hygiene. So they will do the alcohol and hand soap. And then in the environment, initially, they can do the preliminary cleansing with the regular detergent. Then later on, they will use disinfectant to make sure the environment is clean. The next part is the airflow. We need to make sure the environment is kind of in a negative pressure. So then the air is kind of drawn out of the long-term care. So you need to do a lot of things to make this happen. The healthcare workers, you need to measure the body temperature and make sure they do wear the mask. And then they also do the infection prevention control training. And then they will arrange to work on the same floor. So they will not cross a different floor to make sure they will not affect other residents in different floors. And then employees with the infectious disease were restricted to work. They will stay at home. And then there are a lot of hotels that were designated for the healthcare workers. So then there will be a void contact for members outside of work in the workplace or the families. Then if you go to the facilities, you need to do the triage to make sure you do not have the history, the travel or occupation, the contact and everything before you can get into the long-term care facility. Take example for Taiwan, because in April, everything are getting worse. So right now in the hospital or in a long-term care setting, no one is allowed to visit their loved ones in a long-term care setting unless there's very severe problems happen. So they need to send to the hospital, so then they can be visited. So again, we can follow the visitor restrictions. Visitors in the better place, they will need to say their names and phone numbers and make sure if someone got infected, they can be quarantined. But right now, like if things are getting worse, they are not allowed to visit the nursing homes. So again, if patients admit to the long-term care facility, they need to make sure they got vaccinated and also they got a negative result for the PCR before they can admit it to the long-term care facilities. And if they have any acute respiratory infections, they will be tested to make sure they do not have the COVID-19 infections. So then the quarantine rules, it also vary by the countries. Initially, as in Taiwan, we will say that people need to be quarantined for 14 days if they have positive results. But right now, when the infection are getting a lot, so it can decrease to 7 days or even fewer. Especially the healthcare workers, you can see that if you can quarantine them for 14 days or 7 days, the entire facility will do not have enough healthcare workers. So the number will decrease to right now, like Taiwan, they will have only like 3 days quarantine. And in the next 4 days, you will take every day the PCR test before you go to works. And the PCR test is majorly by the nasopharyngeal swab. So other than that, we will have a technology help. So we can have the robots to clean the space. And also we can have the video phone. So then the family do not have to go to the nursing home or long-term care facility to visit their loved ones. They can use the video phones. And also they can have some telemedicine so to limit their visit. So all those things are improving. So the suggestions here for the Asia Pacific vision is that, so for the next couple of months or couple of years, we need to live with COVID-19. Then the living environment for long-term care homes will be scaled to promote the optimal resident well-being and infection control. And long-term care residents, they are frail and vulnerable. So then you need to balance on the virus and the some infectious control. Because if you do too much infectious control, then the people, they cannot live well in the facility. And they are not mutually exclusive. You need to kind of find a balance between the two. So the last slide is talking about some suggestions. If we want to improve outcomes of long-term care residents, we will require more stable and well-supported staffing with proper training in geriatrics, multi-mobility, infection control, and interprofessional leadership. And of course, the long-term care sector must be supported by effective quality assurance systems based on standard, comprehensive, accessible, and clinically available data, and which can support broad communities to practice capable of effective, real, and meaningful changes for frail older persons whenever they choose to reside. And thank you very much for your attention tonight. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Hidenori Arai, National Center for Geriatrics and Gerontology, Japan. Today, I'm going to talk about implication of frailty and disability prevention measures during the COVID-19 pandemic. There's no disclosures. Today, I'm going to talk about the implication of frailty in super-aging societies and also the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on healthy aging. Here you can see the key points of frailty. As you know, frailty is not an inevitable consequence of aging. Frailty is best thought of as a syndrome with multiple etiology rather than a single condition. Frail older people who experience an acute illness will have worse outcomes such as death, nursing home placement, and increased dependence than those who are not frail with similar comorbidities. As you can see, frailty is associated with adverse health outcomes such as disability and death, cardiovascular disease, falls and fractures, ER visit and nursing home placement, dementia, complications after surgery, and polypharmacy. In terms of the frailty assessment, there's no single gold standard, but the phenotype model developed by Lina Fried is useful to identify persons for intervention. The phenotype model assesses physical frailty. However, frailty has other features such as psychological domain and social domain, in addition to physical domain. So it would be ideal to make a comprehensive assessment. The Kihon checklist was developed in Japan to identify frail older adults in the community in 2006. The Kihon checklist consists of 25 yes or no questions, which is divided into 7 subdomains: instrumental ideal, physical function and falls, nutrition, oral function, socialization, memory, and mood. And this has been shown to be able to identify a frail older adult defined by the CHS criteria when we use the cutoff of 8. So in the following study, we have used the Kihon checklist to define frailty. In terms of the prevention intervention of frailty, we have published the guideline with international members. And in this guideline, we strongly recommended that frail persons should be referred to a progressive and individualized physical activity program with a resistance training component. And also, we conditionally recommend that frail older adults with unintentional weight loss should be screened for reversible causes and considered for protein and caloric supplementation. We also published the ICSFR International Clinical Practice Guidelines for identification and management, focusing on physical frailty. So to summarize the countermeasures for frailty, we need exercise, nutritional intervention, and oral care and polypharmacy measures are also important. And active social participation is also important for the prevention of frailty. For the comprehensive management of frailty, multidisciplinary approach is critical. For the management of chronic diseases, the role of doctors, nurses, and pharmacists is critical. For physical problem, a physical therapist is involved. For the nutritional problem, dietitian is involved. For all oral health care, dentist, speech therapist, dental hygiene are involved. For the psychological problem, clinical psychologists can be involved. For the social problem, social workers and mental health social workers are involved. For the management of several services related to frailty and disability, care manager is playing a critical role in Japan. Then I'd like to address the impact of COVID-19 in older people. The key issue is balancing between infection control and prevention of adverse health outcomes related to stay-at-home policy. As shown here, balancing between successful pandemic control and active management of secondary consequences is critical in older people. During the COVID-19 outbreak, community services which are deemed non-essential have been suspended, including senior activity centers, dementia daycare centers, geriatric day hospital, and outreach rehabilitation program. This can be disruptive and stressful for many family caregivers who now have to provide longer hours of caregiving in the context of decreased psychosocial support from family and professional services. The behavior of persons living with dementia may also be worsened due to the disruption of usual care, usual routine, and prolonged period indoors. This figure shows the median total physical activity time in January 2020 and April 2020. Overall, we have found a significant decrease of total physical activity time in April 2020, which is in the middle of pandemic, compared to January 2020, which is before the pandemic. We also performed a subgroup analysis according to the frailty category and found the total physical activity time was significantly decreased in all frailty subcategories. This slide shows the trajectory of physical activity in Japanese older adults during the pandemic. In total, the total physical activity time during the first, second, and third waves of the pandemic decreased by 33%, 28%, and 40% respectively from the pandemic physical activity time. When we divide the cohort into 4 groups based on living alone and lack of social activity, the total physical activity time of older adults who live alone and are socially inactive was much more decreased, minus 42% in the first wave, minus 50% in the second wave, and minus 62% in the third wave. During the year follow-up, 28.8% in living alone and socially inactive group, 15% in not living alone and socially inactive group, 15% in non-living alone and socially active group, and 12% in living alone and socially active group had new incident frailty. In a multivariate analysis using the not living alone and social active group as reference, older adults who live alone and socially inactive showed almost 2-fold higher risk for incident frailty. One of the problems related to the COVID-19 is physical inactivity from being homebound due to fear of infection, which may lead to frailty in older people. The stigma against infected patients and their families is another concern, along with unemployment and deterioration in economic conditions. These issues need to be addressed to avoid downstream corollaries of economic recession, suicide, and disability of older people. To raise awareness of prevention of frailty during the pandemic, the Japan Geriatrics Society published a poster, COVID-19 Practice caution for older people. This is a paper published by the Asian Working Group for Sarcopenia. The Asian Working Group for Sarcopenia summarized the considerations of Asian countries, focusing on responses and difficulties in each country, impacts of health inequality related to the COVID-19 pandemic, and proposed recommendations for older people which are germane to the Asian context. More innovative services should be developed to address the increasing demand for new approaches to deliver healthcare in these difficult times and to establish resilient healthcare system for older people. Actually, we have our center published home exercise program for older people, which we call HIPHOP 2020. The NCGG HIPHOP 2020 was created to support older people who cannot go out or are restricted from social activities. In addition to presenting various types of exercises and activities, the flowchart can be used to determine the appropriate activity plans for the individual so they can safely engage in appropriate activities to prevent mental and physical deterioration while isolating at home. In the NCGG HIPHOP 2020, we focus on physical function, nutrition, and oral function. Here you can see the summary of potential effect of government restrictions on lifestyle behaviors and the mechanisms by which they can lead to reduced muscle protein synthesis and increased muscle protein breakdown, resulting in muscle loss. The development of sarcopenia is associated with a significantly increased risk of multiple comorbidities, some of which may also increase the risk of COVID-19 infection and severity. In summary, frailty is a major issue that needs to be addressed for healthy aging. Lifestyle modification, including exercise and nutrition, should be started as early as possible, along with disease management for frailty prevention. COVID-19 is a huge challenge for human beings, and a holistic approach is required for the prevention of frailty in older people. Thank you very much for your kind attention.
With older people frequently described as vulnerable in relation to COVID-19, we saw a surge in ageism and intergenerational tensions. Sometimes ageism is well-intentioned, designed to protect older people. Sometimes ageism is purposeful and political, designed to blame older people and limit their freedoms. In this presentation, we'll consider how older people were affected by ageism with examples for countries across the Asia-Oceania region. We'll also discuss the healing and how we now need to have if we're to promote healthy aging and protect older people's rights, with particular focus on the Asia-Oceania region. Ageism is a global pandemic that disables and kills. Although it's been fought for decades, ageism continues to generate stigmatization and complacency in all societies. Old age is a term that is arguably ageist in itself because it suggests a sameness based purely on number of years lived. On the basis of a single criteria, it inaccurately proposes uniformity out of enormous diversity, and it largely attaches negative to the construct of aging. Ageism affects how we think, the stereotypes that we have about older people, how we feel, the prejudices we have about older people, and how we act, how we discriminate against older people. And these may be towards others or may be turned in towards ourselves based on age. So remember, there's no such thing as the elderly, as if it's one big amorphous homogeneous group. There's great variability in intrinsic capacity, backgrounds, circumstances, preferences, personalities, goals. We're all different. And of course, when we talk about older age, we might be talking anything from 60 plus, 65 plus, 80 plus, or even 100 plus. So there's no such thing as the elderly. We're all very, very different. This graph shows the COVID-19 stringency index. I downloaded it on the 16th of May. And so this shows what the circumstances for 6 countries in our region up until the 15th of May. And what it is, a composite measure based on the 9 response indicators, including things like school closures, workplace closures, and travel bans, scaled to a value from 0 to 100. Not all the graphs are on the same scale, but Australia, China, Indonesia, and Singapore are on Australia, Indonesia, and Singapore are on a scale that goes from 0 to 60, whereas China and India are on a scale that goes from 60 to about 80, and Thailand's on a scale that goes from 0 to 50. So you can see there the relative stringency in terms of COVID restrictions in these different countries, with China having very high restrictions throughout the pandemic, Singapore and Australia running along with fairly high restrictions throughout the pandemic, but maybe places like Thailand having slightly lower restrictions, and also there being variations in restrictions on the basis of whether people are vaccinated or not. What this doesn't show is the restrictions on the basis of age. And I think we might see a much wider variation between the curves if we looked at the restrictions on the variation on the basis of age. So let's talk about COVID and ageism. So from the start of the pandemic, older people were portrayed as vulnerable. This is a word that was only meant to apply to their vulnerability if they became infected. But the word resonated around the community and across the totality of older people's lives. However, statistically, older people have been less prone to become infected than younger people, and they've also proven to be less vulnerable to some of the mental and social effects of the pandemic and the public health response. In many ways, they were more resilient and resourceful, being able to put the COVID crisis into proportion in the context of their long lives. For their protection, older people's movements were constricted during lockdowns, constraining social interaction and increasing isolation. Some governments have imposed restrictions on movement by age, with rules requiring that older people shall stay at home or remain in their residences at all times, with some exceptions. In many cases, these restrictions may have been proportionate to risk, but they were also sometimes disproportionate, ambiguous, and they changed rapidly. Older people may have got the message, but missed the point. I know, for example, that my parents thought they couldn't hug each other, even though they lived in the same house. In light of public warnings about the serious threat of COVID-19, many older people were afraid to leave their homes. It didn't help that many messages and updates were promoted online, leaving those on the other side of the digital divide at a disadvantage. Restrictions and messages based simply on age may reinforce an ageist narrative of decline that imply that older people are simply a vulnerable group. Family members would tell older parents not to participate in local activities or go out for groceries, opting to do this for them out of concern for their safety. However, this resulted in fewer opportunities for people to engage in physical activity, including the activity that came from shopping. In aged care, there was a paradox that older people within the aged care workforce might be stood down so we could protect them, while those whose home is in residential care became isolated and family and friends so we could protect them. The Australian Government's Royal Commission into Aged Care Quality and Safety held a hearing into the response to COVID in aged care. The Commission noted that most residents of aged care homes had not experienced a COVID outbreak in their facility, but they endured restrictions for most of the year that go beyond those endured by the general community. These restrictions limited visits by family and attendances by healthcare providers. They also increased staff workloads and reduced the instrumental and expressive care that could be provided. As a consequence, residents' physical and mental health was put at risk. There was a lot of rhetoric about rationing healthcare on the basis of age. However, compared to other regions, there's less evidence from Asia of a discrimination in access to healthcare facilities and equipment such as ventilators. Healthcare systems in countries such as Japan and Korea are well equipped and appear to have handled the surge in cases. Countries with a high number of cases and relatively weak healthcare systems, however, may have fared very differently. But even in Japan, in areas that were hotspots for COVID, sick older people were dying because they're not able to receive proper medical care through triage. In some countries, government vaccination has prioritised younger age groups ahead of older people, despite their significantly higher risk of dying from COVID. This included restricting trials to those under 60 and focusing on people of productive age. This is because these people were thought to be those who could work hard, and so the country would not have a deficit in their workforce. But this just played into inaccurate generalizations about older people's public worth and general value, and justified ageist discrimination. There was very little focus on rights and protecting what people could do. And for many reasons, older people face delay or denial of services, including attention to basic needs. This limitation would have accelerated functional decline and amplified the stereotype that people above a certain age are invariably helpless, frail, and unable to contribute to society. Across Asia, older people are generally revered and respected, but rhetoric around COVID may have disrupted these values. According to media reports, there are many examples where older people were isolated so they could be protected or abandoned when they were infected. In India, a survey reported that around 70% of the older population said that elder abuse frequency had increased, and 64% of adults felt neglected. On the other hand, in many families, intergenerational solidarity was observed as an advantage of the lockdown, as bonding between 2 or 3 generations was strengthened. A thematic analysis of Weibo topics portrayed older people as warm, competent, and actively exercising their agency. This suggests intergenerational solidarity during the pandemic in China, in contrast to findings from similar studies in the West. However, another project published last year referred to increased frequency and intensity of family conflict and a clash of generational values on issues such as academic performance, career planning, and marriage or relationship status. This may be due to prolonged forced proximity of family members, but also may be because the narrative of older persons' vulnerability was eroding traditional values of parental authority. Discourse on the internet, particularly through social media, has highlighted a narrative that young people are being sacrificed to protect older people. Global narratives of aging have become more negative since the pandemic. One of the means was that COVID is a boomer remover. This concept is thought to represent intergenerational discounting, a description of breakdown in reciprocal obligations of care. So if COVID is a boomer remover, it's removing a generation that has failed to protect future generations from climate change. But what we really need is intergenerational solidarity. We can work together for solutions such as COVID and for solutions to climate change. The importance of attending to the needs of older people who may be more vulnerable to greater morbidity and mortality from COVID, we must consider that age is only one factor that increases this vulnerability. Older people are also part of the societal response to the COVID crisis. Remember, most older people are not in long-term care facilities. And healthcare rationing should be made on the basis not of age alone, but on consideration of other factors which may affect treatment, prognosis, and response. Older people can be at risk of social isolation, increasing risks of depression, malnutrition, neglect, and abuse. In Australia, as in many countries, we are campaigning against ageism through the Every Age Counts campaign. This is a serious effort to get ageing onto all agenda, to recognise ageing as a part of life's journey. Protecting older people against COVID is important, but it's also important to protect older people's rights to autonomy, participation, and realisation as full citizens. Thank you.
speakers today to give us in the very early morning and give us a very good talk here. And now we have some minutes for the Q&A. Is any question come out? Or we have two discussions, Professor says and Professor here. You can give some words, some comment here now. Professor here or Professor says. Can you hear me?
I will just give a couple of comments, then pass to Sirafan. Excellent presentations, very diverse mix of facts and figures and impacts of COVID-19 across the region. A lot of diversity between our countries, a lot of highlight about the physical and the social isolation impacts that have been very dramatic. One of the things in Australia that we've seen as well is that chronic disease is not being managed well. People are not seeing their doctors for their management, and therefore chronic disease health problems are becoming even more prevalent than before COVID. Things like falls, we're getting much more presentations of falls to emergency departments and hospitalisations, all because of the change in what people are doing during COVID. The other one point I'll just quickly make is around the critical importance of the social engagement of older people, and that even though we've had technology as pretty much the only option for many older people, it's not the same as face-to-face. And if we have this ever again, we have to have other alternatives to be able to socially engage with older people. I'll pass over to Sirafan if there's no other questions.
Yes, thank you. Very good presentation. But what we found that some of people doesn't want to take vaccination due to they're afraid of the side effect, and also the future effect might be happen. So, what would we suggest? What would Professor Asantachai suggest about the vaccination?
Yes.
Yes, thank you, Professor Siripan. From our study, for people tend to be afraid of the side effects and the long-term sequelae of the vaccine, because the vaccine is emergency vaccine, so it's no any evidence on the long-term effects. So we have the low-dose vaccine, but intradermal injection, and from our study, it showed that intradermal vaccination is quite effective, and also almost effective as well. But it's more side effect from the local injection because the intradermal. Anyway, the only people tend to be favor the low dose.
Thank you.
Thank you for your comment and your question. Is there any idea or any discussion here from all of us? And it's nice to see you all in this moment. Professor Bai
has a comment.
Yes.
Yes, I think the range of presentations, as Keith said, diverse across a number of different fronts. But what they illustrate is that we can't and couldn't have dealt with COVID or any other, whatever. I mean, COVID's still with us. I think that's very clear from Professor Praset's presentation, that we can't deal with COVID just on one front. So when the pandemic first came about, all we had was hygiene and lockdowns and social isolation. And we had to live with that for many months until we were able to get vaccines. Then vaccines have been a game changer. And that's why we can now survive with very high case numbers, very high rates of infection, but the impact of those infections are lower where people are vaccinated. But when we forgot to vaccinate the older people, then they remained vulnerable to infection. And the other thing I think from Professor Hidenori's presentation is that we can't just worry about the virus. We have to worry about all of the other things that go with aging, that go with multimorbidity, that go with vulnerability to frailty. And so no good protecting people from a virus when we let them develop frailty from immobility, we let them develop other conditions, loneliness, depression, isolation, physical decline. And then as Professor Hill said, we neglect their overall healthcare and the management of their chronic diseases. So I think it's been a real lesson in needing to have holistic approaches, multi-pronged approaches, not just relying on one piece of technology, and considering older people not as vulnerable, but as part of the solution, active players in their own lives, but also needing to have very integrated and responsive healthcare systems.
Yes, only we people be active, then the virus will be inactive.
That's right.
That's right. And so I think, yes. Any comment here?
Yes, may I ask Professor Hidenori about the frame? Because our session, we do not touch about the mental health such as depression, and the worsening of the dementia. So from your study, Professor Hidenori, do you have any data on the mental health from your study?
You're asking about the medical health of all the people during the pandemic. As Keith mentioned, many older people stopped going to the hospital during the pandemic because of the concern for infection. So that's why the management of chronic diseases is getting worse during the pandemic. But after 1 year, so that was the situation in 2020. But in 2021, people realized that it's safe to go to the hospital. So the situation is getting better. So public awareness is important that hospital is a safe place. We have a perfect management of infection during the pandemic. So it's very important to tell the people that we should go to the hospital regularly as before the pandemic.
I have a question. Yeah, I have a question to Professor Bai about the older person. They seem to be a privileged group, that's seen by the other group because of their at the high risk, and they are in the front line to receive vaccination before the other age group. So this policy seem to discriminate other age group.
Yes.
So what do you think of this point?
Yes. Okay. So yes, we can have positive discrimination as well as negative discrimination. So older people were prioritized in the vaccination process in Australia. So older people and healthcare workers were able to get their vaccinations early. And this was on the basis of risk, not of catching COVID, but of the risk of dying from it or having serious consequences if you did get COVID. So older people were seen to be vulnerable if they were infected. And so they were prioritized to reduce the risk of death among that group of people, and healthcare workers as well. So we could reduce both the spread of infection among healthcare workers, but also keep them on the job because we can't afford to lose our workforce. So those were very highly prioritized groups. And still in Australia, the group over the age of 65 can now get a fourth vaccination, due for a fourth vaccination. So we have very high rates of vaccination in Australia. We had the problem that people wanted vaccinations and couldn't get them, and there was outrage and uproar about that, as well as a handful of people that thought that vaccinations were the devil. But the other thing really was around the nature of the vaccine, the brand of vaccine that you could get. And so I think we had quite a large problem with people wanting the Pfizer vaccine rather than the AstraZeneca vaccine, with older people being more likely to be eligible for the AstraZeneca vaccine and younger people more likely to be eligible for the Pfizer. So I guess the older people won a little bit in getting advanced access to vaccines, but lost out by having AstraZeneca rather than Pfizer. Not that I think it mattered that much.
It's happened here too.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes, because the COVID-19 people get along into the vaccine, and people now we are familiar with how to get a good vaccination for our health.
Yes.
And because it's we have overtime for six minutes, and good time is always so short. I think I have to close our session now because it's also, and then we can go to bed or go to hear another talk. And good time is always so short. I think it's a productive and enjoyable conference. And I would like to take this chance to say thanks to all of you, Professor Sese, Professor here, Professor Sentasai, Professor Arai, Professor Bayo, and Ding Zheng, my boy, my boyfriend. And thank me also. Thank you. Yes, because we are a strong team, right?
Yeah, we're a great team.
And thank you for Professor here and Professor Sentasai and Professor Sese for your turn. And now become to me and Ding Zheng. And next, Professor Arai. I think it's a team. So we keep very close in touch. And then we can do something good for people in Asia Oceania region. So thank you to everybody. And thank you and have a good night and have a good day.
Good
Bye-bye.
night.
Thank you very much. Good night.
Thank you.
Good night.
Thank you.